I'm back in plenary session, virtual edition. I'm joined by Zeb Jamrozik. Dr. Jamrozik is a practicing physician. He is a doctorate in ID ethics, which you wouldn't think it turned out to be the most useful thing, to have a doctorate in that discipline. He is a frequent guest of this show, friend of the show, and a beloved guest. I mean, I think a lot of people watch you on this, and really your framework and your perspective has really resonated with a lot of people. Thank you so much for coming back on.
Thanks, Vinay. It's great to be here again.
I wish we didn't have to keep meeting under these circumstances, but it appears we do. There's a lot of big picture questions we're going to talk about. Let's give listeners a little bit of a roadmap. We're going to try to talk about censorship, misinformation, authoritarian public health, like what's going on right now in China, science in times of crisis, some of the rules in Australia. But I thought a few specific examples might get the ball rolling nicely. You followed the very interesting story of New York City and Kyrie Irving. This is apparently a basketball player. I don't know if you saw this. My understanding of the situation is that this is a gentleman who is 20-something-year-old, healthy NBA basketball player. Some people tell me, but I haven't been able to confirm, that he's had and recovered from COVID-19. But whether that is or is not true, he's decided he didn't want to be vaccinated. So he joins that fraction of people who go that way. Interestingly, New York City had a mandate, which is that if your primary place of employment is New York City, you can't work in New York City unless you have been vaccinated. But other cities don't have that mandate, and he's an NBA player. So he's allowed to go to other cities and play NBA basketball. But he can't play NBA basketball in his own city of New York City. But interestingly, they recently lifted their vaccine passport rules and their mask mandates, so he can attend the very game he's not allowed to play in, and he can stand on the front row 2 feet away from the court, and he can breathe all over it with no mask, but he can't step on that court and shoot the basketball. And his team got fined when he went in the locker room. And the added irony to the situation is this created such a brouhaha. NBA basketball players were critical of the mayor who sets this policy that they've created a carve out for, I think, professional sports and performance artists, that they don't have to have the vaccine mandate, but that carve out doesn't exist for other people. And I guess to some degree it's a small example of just absolutely contradictory policy. But to a large extent, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And I'm curious what you think. We had the mask mandate in restaurants, which meant from the door to the table, but not when you're eating. I see a lot of places. I just saw an Amazon guy delivering packages. He has to wear a mask. I assume that's sort of his corporate policy. A lot of restaurants, the servers are wearing masks, but not the patrons. Of course, if they lift all the mandates, then people quickly throw away the mask. Tells you how much they enjoyed wearing it. But I'm curious, do you think these kinds of contradictions, are they just something we focus on, or are they actually a reason why people come to get angry and distrustful of public health?
Yeah, well, I think I've been thinking about these absurd rules quite a bit, actually. And one of the things I find scary about them is that it's kind of like when people join the army and the army says, you must follow these rules, even if they make no sense. And it's partly about, I think, getting people into a kind of discipline of following rules unthinkingly, right? And it's almost as if the people who want to defend kind of the dystopia of rules that we've been living in general will fiercely defend the ones that make no sense. Meanwhile, the other people, as you say, lose trust in public health because this is the 21st century. There's big data. There's plenty of science available on the internet. A lot of people aren't stupid, and they can just see that wearing a mask as you walk into the restaurant and so on doesn't make sense. The servers wearing a mask doesn't make sense. The evidence on cloth masks shows that they don't work. So kind of a lot of these rules are just so nonsensical that one worry I have is that people internalize this idea that they should just follow the rules even though they make no sense, and that's not what we want in a free thinking democracy. And then I guess the other thing about it is, when did we work out that vaccines don't really block transmission? Well, in May 2021, when there was that outbreak in the Singapore airport, vaccinated staff, very good rule-following people, fully vaccinated, there was an outbreak among those staff. It became clear that there was a very significant post-vaccination infection rate that could be transmitted. And once we knew that, I don't think mandates could possibly be justified. And I personally think they've been a net harm to society in all kinds of ways. I've worked on a paper on that with some other co-authors. And then there's a kind of problem with kind of class, that we've set up this set of rules that there are classes of people, like you say, the delivery person, the person serving you, and so on, who have to wear them, and other people don't. The rich people at awards ceremonies don't have to wear them, but the people serving them do. The politicians don't have to wear them, but the children in school do. And it's being enforced on people who have the least ability to kind of defend their own rights. And if you believe in equality, equity, fairness, you should see that that's unfair, and that's a really bad idea.
The right to show your face, it's such a fundamental right. I never thought it would be taken away just of the working class people. Yeah, and your point is also well done. And I see that you're co-author on that very lovely article that's out at SSRN. Where is it? SSRN. It's pre-printed, and it's leading to. I see in Toronto they're actually having a health law policy forum. Do vaccine mandates do more harm than good? And they have Steph Burrell, and they have what's his name, Kevin from British Columbia. Yes, and others discussing this issue. And to me, that signals two good things. One, the Academy, which has been scared to host any debates, scared and cowardice and embarrassment. I really think that that's something that, maybe it's a point that I'm curious what you think. But I mean, I think that there is this thing called cancel culture, whether anyone wants to admit it or not, and it's getting stronger, and it got stronger, happened to coincide with COVID-19. And there's a thing called the Academy, which has always been the place where you're able to debate controversial ideas, and we allow people a wide berth. Even if we think what we're saying is wrong and silly and stupid, we allow them to be stupid, because every so often of 100 stupid people, maybe 2 of them are brilliant, and you just didn't see that. And that's the whole purpose of the freedom. It's not that, because you just don't know. And a lot of people throughout history, from Barry Marshall, who drank the H. pylori, to Jim Allison, who, came up with T-cell inhibition, have been called lots of names and laughed at when they turned out to be right. So, okay, so that's why we give them a wide berth. At the same time, we've made universities addicted to donor money, addicted to, public-private partnerships and this kind of corporatism, and we put the people in charge of the universities are not the most often passionate defender of academic freedom. It's the most corporatist, a politician person who works there. And as a result, that when this pandemic happened, naturally a crisis where emotions are going to be high. People feel like your bad policy is not just a bad idea; it's killing me. They're going to want to use the tactics of cancel culture to silence debate. And I think largely the university's acquiesced. And, Jay Bhattacharya, he says Stanford hosted zero debates at Stanford University, despite the fact that they have Atlas and Ioannidis and Bhattacharya and many other people who felt fundamentally different. Zero debates on whether or not we should lock down, shut down, school closure, all these things. That's astonishing. And so I guess I came to this because I'm heartened that actually Toronto, there's some crack in the dam.
Yeah, well, what we did for that paper led by Kevin Bardosh is not that complicated in a lot of ways. We got a lot of different disciplines, people with experience in kind of hard science, people with experience in ethics like me, people with social science of health and public health. And we just went through all the ways that vaccine mandates and other types of mandates have harmed society. And one regret I have is that we didn't write that paper sooner. But initially, when all of us said this might be a bad idea, of course, people said, well, there's no evidence that it's a bad idea, and that of course, now the evidence of harms is just accumulating every single day. But yeah, the Academy, I think the erosion of kind of academic freedom and courage, for that matter, in the Academy is maybe symptomatic of a wider problem in democratic institutions. Democracy doesn't just work because you're able to vote for who the president or prime minister is. Democracy requires that you have a whole bunch of really healthy institutions. The Academy is one of those institutions, which is about generating new ideas, as you say. But there's also, for example, the US FDA that's responsible for independently approving interventions before they can be used on human beings. There's the Centers for Disease Control that's, responsible for enacting science-based public health. There's the courts, which are responsible for enforcing checks on executive power. And all of these institutions have shown incredible weakness during this pandemic in the US, like in other places. So there's a kind of institutional problem. There's also a problem, of course, of individual fear and individual courage, and it's just the case that there's not a lot of academics who are brave enough to stand up from their very safe, well-feathered positions in society and use the freedom that they have to speak up when something's wrong, and moreover, when less powerful people are being harmed by what's wrong. There's only a few of those people around. Hopefully there's going to be more and more. And I think there are more and more people who are now brave enough to speak, but it's been difficult to do so in lots of ways.
Yeah, that's well put. I also have talked to a few people who happen to be early signatories of the Great Barrington Declaration who are professors, and they told me about some of the backlash they received. And so I guess, of course, I didn't sign that document, but just because it didn't have exactly what I wanted in it, but I certainly thought it was a dialogue to be had, and I wrote as much at the time. That obviously, in retrospect, even their most ardent critic has to concede one thing: they were right about schools. They're 100% right, but they were the ones that were right about schools, and the other side wasn't. Let's talk about. This is a point you made to me that I think is really apt. Today we have the VRBAC meeting. In the United States, we approve drug products, and then a couple weeks later, we have the advisory committee to discuss the validity of those approvals. That's the way you do it when you have sort of a totalitarian approach to regulation, not a democratic approach. And this is about the fourth dose. Now, I see the European CDC is saying something like you can consider a fourth dose in people over 80 or people who are chronic residents of nursing homes. And I say, that's going to be the group that I would target if I were to target it. The United States went beyond Pfizer's request. Pfizer said 65 and older. They said, you know what? Hey, Pfizer, you're asking me for $50. Let me just give you the full dollar bill. Let me just give you a few more $20. Let me give you a little extra money. And they gave him 50 and up. 50 and up, all healthy people in this country have an EUA authorization to receive a fourth dose. If you're a 51-year-old healthy person, got 3 doses, potentially even an Omicron superinfection, you are eligible to receive. This regulatory authority says it is safe and effective for you to receive. It is, in fact, reasonable for you to receive a fourth dose. This is, I think, we can talk about that. The basis of this is the same thing that we see with masking studies, fourth dose studies, which is not a large randomized control trial where we randomly assign people. It is an observational study of what happens to people who choose to do this versus people who don't choose to do this, or people who choose to do it soon versus people who choose to do it later. And this is evidence that people, yesterday New England Journal this morning, I think New England Journal has the paper, Israeli experience with fourth dose. And I saw a faculty member at a university in this country said, we know there are no harms. I said, well, you know that? You know that? You know there's no harm, so there's a benefit? And this is the most persuasive, elegant study. Those aren't the words that come to my mind. I wonder if you could talk about observational studies for medical products, for interventions. Why have we not accepted them for, 25 years? Why have we thought they're inferior evidence?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a whole range of reasons, but yeah, a big reason that you've pointed out on a few different things here is confounding factors. In first year epidemiology, you learn about how an observed association between doing thing A and outcome B might be due to A causing B, or it might be due to a bias in the way the information was collected or who was selected for the study. But it also might be due to confounding factors, something that's linked to both A and B. And we're seeing that over and over again in the pandemic. So for example, studies of mask mandates, different places that institute mask mandates and places that don't, those places differ by more factors than just do they wear masks? Same as the early observation that in some East Asian countries, rates of COVID were lower. Everyone said it was masks. There might be something different about kind of those places that isn't related to the masks directly. Observational data in children, we don't have any good data showing that the benefits of vaccination outweigh the risks in children. And to do that, we would have to have a large randomized control trial of, probably 100,000 children or more. But if you do an observational study, you can easily show that, and the CDC did this and published it in their journal, that the children who get vaccinated have a lower rate of, say, multi-system inflammatory syndrome. But if you take a closer look at that study, you'll see that, just like we observed everywhere else, The children who get bad outcomes from COVID are often not only children with comorbidities, but people in the US from poor non-white families. And nowhere in that study is it mentioned that at the same time, the children who were getting vaccinated first were the children of rich white families. And so it's no surprise that it appears that vaccination is associated with a lower risk of severe outcomes, because the kids who were getting vaccinated, they were at lower risk of severe outcomes anyway. Likewise, the 4th dose study in Israel, the people who rushed out and got vaccinated first with the 4th dose, they were different people to the ones who didn't. And so it will appear that the vaccine is producing a risk reduction, but it's actually confounded by the fact that these are different people going out at that time. And yeah, if a first-year epidemiology student presented this to me, they would fail. But instead we're making policy based on this.
It's astounding. I mean, I think across all these domains, the people who rushed to get the 4th dose, in one of the Israeli preprints I read, they had higher socioeconomic status. They have different sort of racial makeup. They're less likely to be Orthodox or Arab. They're more likely to, they are from a different group. They're probably far more likely to engage in other protective behaviors, like sitting in your house all day and keeping the door shut and getting all your food delivery. The kids who are the first to be vaccinated, affluent kids, advantaged kids. And you're comparing them to the kids who there is some vaccine hesitancy. This is not reliable. I mean, you can't conclude it's the product. And then my favorite was, there's so many of these mask studies. They're all flawed, of course. But one I thought was better than the others. It actually tried to match county by county, and it even matched for the rate of spread, the R coefficient, and cases in the days preceding having a mandate or not having a mandate. So they tried to get that lined up, and then they could show the trajectory was different. But the point I was trying to make to the author, who didn't hear what I was trying to say, was that we know these counties are different. Proof that they're different is that at the same threshold of cases on the dashboard, one is saying we're going to have a mask mandate, the other saying, you know what, let's let it ride a little bit longer. We're going to enjoy ourselves, Okay, they're different places. And so probably the people in those places are different. And probably on balance, people in the county that's less likely to deploy the mandate are also less likely to seek testing in the first place. So what you're matching this R coefficient, but it's an observed R with, 62% of people seeking testing versus 52% of people seeking testing. And you're actually matching a more brisk trajectory against your trajectory. And actually what happens in the days since, don't be surprised that the county that doesn't want to do anything, that was an underestimate of the real trajectory and it's going to blow through the roof. Anyway, so I tried to explain this to the person, but they didn't see it. I was like, I give up. It's really sad. I mean, it's sad that, in 2022, it feels like we're using kind of science that was soundly debunked in 1992. We're back in the 70s in terms of the quality of medical evidence, and not for small decisions, for the most consequential decisions. Mass campaigns of millions of people either engaging in behavior change that is incredibly divisive, and a medical intervention that's being deployed in such widespread fashion based on the lowest quality evidence.
Yeah. And I just want to make a link there between the kind of the problem of ethics and the problem of evidence, like evidence-based public health. People have said once we institute these kind of measures, it would be unethical to study them. We're so sure that these measures must do something, it would be unethical to study them. Well, that's a mistake. And it's a mistake that's made in sort of clinical medicine too. So it's actually not only the case that it would be unethical to study these interventions, it's that there's an ethical obligation to study these interventions. Why? Because as you say, these are enormously consequential. Many people are getting affected by them. There are potential harms of each of these interventions. In many cases, we're mandating them, so we're taking away people's freedom to refuse these interventions. So there's an extra kind of ethical reason why you would want to see that the benefits of these interventions outweigh the harms. And so there's never been a stronger case, ethically speaking, for randomized control trials than this pandemic, and they should have started, from day zero. And I really like. Just hold on one second.
Sure.
Yeah. So I really like that proposal that you made. That next time we have a public health emergency from an infectious disease epidemic, the clock starts then, and you can institute any intervention you like within reason, and you have 3 months to show that the benefits of that intervention outweigh the harms in a randomized control trial design, whether individually randomized or cluster randomized. And if at the end of that 3 months you can't show that the benefits outweigh the harms of that intervention, you have to stop doing that intervention, or it merely becomes recommended rather than mandated. And if we had have done that, we would have stopped doing a whole range of things back in 2020 that weren't helping. And yeah, some people might think that 3 months isn't long enough, but that's not true. If it's a genuine emergency, you can get data really quickly. Pfizer got their data within 46 days, showing separation of curves and stopping the study. So you don't even need 3 months if it's a real emergency.
That's a terrific point. And, I like it because it's sort of the accelerated approval idea brought to non-pharmacological interventions, which is you get to try it, but you have a post-marketing commitment, which is generate evidence, or it's going to be rescinded. But I suspect that just like the accelerated approval, it'll suffer from the same problems, which is that the people won't have the courage to pull the plug on it. So I do think, maybe the solution is these needs to be sort of written into constitutions, or a sort of constitution of health crisis, which I think we desperately need. Because, and this will talk about the next issue, the authoritarian issue, what democratic free societies were willing to do was unprecedented. Unprecedented suppression of the ability to congregate, to meet, to assemble, to speak even, These are deep threats to democracy, and I don't think it has been appreciated enough because people feel like they were done for the right reason. At least some people feel that way. But I think increasingly, people are waking up because, like all things, when the heat of the moment is over, you see it more clearly. And that might be the way in which to codify some of these things. But let's talk for a minute about authoritarian public health. I've been reading horrific stories from Shanghai, which is under lockdown. And the stories say something like, people's babies are being ripped from their arms because the parents are positive, or the baby is positive, or the child is positive. Kids like 2-year-old kids, like infants, and they're taken to the quarantine centers, and people aren't allowed to go out, and you have to get your food delivered, but there's food scarcity, and so people are rationing their food in their homes, all in pursuit of zero COVID, which I feel like even the Chinese government should realize is not able, even that they cannot sustain, but they don't seem to realize it. Of course, they, at baseline, not exactly a place of democracy, but it's gotten worse. I guess that's the point. It's gotten worse. And I don't think they're going to win. They're going to get swept up in the next wave. So what are your thoughts on what's going on there, and what are the lessons for the Western world?
Yeah, well, I guess we're doing a big global social experiment. Is authoritarian public health the best way of handling an infectious disease emergency? And I think in early 2020, a lot of people saw what authoritarianism could do in China, and they were very impressed by that. And some democracies took on these authoritarian approaches, which I personally think was a mistake. But now, 2 years later, the democracies are all coming out of things, more or less okay. And the kind of more democratic places with better functioning institutions, like in Scandinavia, they're coming out best. But authoritarian states, people who've tried to do authoritarian public health, have largely failed. And we're clearly seeing harms that are massively outweighing any benefits. Who tried this? Well, Vietnam, they abandoned this approach. Hong Kong, they just recorded the highest case fatality risk for COVID-19, enormous deaths among older citizens. China, as you mentioned, Shanghai, I don't know how many millions of people are under house arrest right now for a prolonged period, when only a minority of those are infected, and only a minority of the infected people have symptoms. And even in Australia, Canada, the US, in places we've tried authoritarian public health and it doesn't really work. And it's worth pointing out two things. First, we already had an experiment on this during the AIDS pandemic, where we tried shaming people, keeping them under surveillance, ostracizing them for society for being HIV positive. And then everyone in public health realized this isn't the way to handle an infectious disease. People will do things that increase the spread of infection. People will feel unfairly vilified and so on. And everyone agreed. People wrote books on the idea that we had to balance human rights, freedoms, and public health in the context of HIV. And I think that applies broadly to other infectious diseases, including respiratory pathogens. And the second thing is, as you mentioned, the link between zero COVID and authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the basic problem here is that if you're aiming for elimination, if you're aiming for zero, then what you're willing to tolerate in terms of harms, restrictions on freedoms, and so on, will escalate very rapidly. That applies to any public health problem. An analogy would be if you're aiming for zero road accident deaths, well, then you might put in the craziest road rules possible to kind of avoid anyone ever having an accident, but then the road system would stop working. Same thing in public health, in infectious diseases, rather. If you're aiming for zero of any infectious disease, there's a risk that you're going to undermine human rights in a big way to try and get to zero.
I think that's well said. I also think it's such a delusion. I mean, it's like the greatest human delusion I've ever seen. I saw a couple of schools in California have reinstituted mask mandates because they've outbreaks of gastroenteritis. I was like, gastroenteritis? What do you got, the mask mandate? I was like, I got to get back to the drawing board and teach you how these things spread. But all right, fine. All right, you want to do it? I was like, okay, you got the gastro now. Why is the gastro going around? Well, I hate to break it to them, but gastro's been going around kids for a long time. And you know what? Going around kids for a long time since. And I don't think you can keep it at bay. I mean, and what will it take to keep it? I think they've entered this delusion. I hear people say, I haven't had a cold in 2 years. I was like, yeah, you're not going to be able to sustain it. And, you'll have a good couple years, but then you're going to get 5 colds in 4 months. And you're going to be, one of them is just going to blow you away. You're going to be in bed all day, that's just life. It's life. That's what these things do. They have, they're very highly evolutionary selected pathogens that thrive on normal human behavior. That's why they exist. You will not be able to suppress the normal human behavior. You can try with extreme draconian measures. You will sacrifice all the things we value. You will show that you're an unprincipled person. You give up your principles. You give up who you are. All the Enlightenment values, you'll throw those away. And then you will still, I think, get it at the end. And I think China is not out of the woods. I don't know. I guess as critical as one can be of their government, the people who do run China include many smart people. I mean, they have done a lot of things. They've been able to figure out how to make trains go between cities in a fast way. In the United States, we don't know how to do that. We just drive on pothole roads and fly in horrible airplanes. We just put more seats in the plane. That's our solution. But they figured out some things. But I don't understand. I really don't understand why they think they can do this. They will be swept. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, so that's right. And it is hubris to think that we can suppress infectious diseases forever. It was hubris to think that we could eliminate or eradicate a respiratory virus by, early 2020, when it was already established in, huge populations in the world, populations that have never eliminated measles, for example, despite having a near perfect vaccine. But just to go back to your gastroenteritis point, I think that's an interesting one. So like you, I'm looking forward to seeing the randomized control trial data that masks prevent gastroenteritis. I think we're going to be waiting a long time for that. But there's kind of 2 other reasons why there's so much gastroenteritis going around. The first one is that merely using hand sanitizer, which people have adopted as a normal practice, isn't as effective as washing your hands.
Correct, yes.
And it's been shown here in Australia that use of hand sanitizer probably played a role in outbreaks of gastroenteritis instead of people washing their hands, which would have been more effective. The second reason is that we're seeing rebound epidemics. I've talked about this in the context of other respiratory viruses that have been suppressed during the pandemic. But if you look through history, there's a number of examples where infectious diseases were suppressed for a time, and then they just come back, double or triple what they were before, because there's less immunity in the population. And in the case of schools, you close schools for 2 years, you keep all the kids separate, you keep society shut down, then you gradually reintroduce people, and all of a sudden you have the perfect setup for large epidemics. And I'm on hospital service right now in Australia, and sure, we have an epidemic of COVID, but we also have a whole range of rebound epidemics of other viruses.
Right.
And there's a couple of problems. One is that, people, like you said, haven't had a virus for 2 years. So they're like, oh my God, I feel so sick, but my COVID test is negative. How could it be true?
Yeah.
Well, that's because other viruses can be horrible too. And the second problem is that this myopic focus on COVID alone, I've seen so many cases where the patient and the doctors say, well, we tested for COVID so many times and it's negative. We don't understand how they could be sick, but they haven't tested for other causes of that problem. And they just released a report here in Australia showing that that's led to patient harm. People focused on the idea that the cause must be COVID has led to them ignoring other causes. This is at the individual level. So we're seeing huge distortions in the way people think as a result of this myopic focus on one virus for the last 2 years.
One thing I want to say is I think that there are some commenters, even from your country, Australia, that were inspired by what China could do and actually recommended it in the early weeks of the pandemic. But I want to talk about one thing. You talked about courage and how that's in decline. I think another thing in decline is principles. I don't think people have principles. Here's what I mean. You co-authored a paper with Stephen, and how do you pronounce his last name? Krajeveld?
Yeah.
Huh? How do you say it?
Krajeveld, I think.
Krajeveld. The paper is entitled Against COVID-19 Vaccination of Healthy Children. It's published in the journal Bioethics, written with you and a colleague. It's open access. He tweets, quote, I'm happy to announce that my third paper of my PhD against COVID vaccine with healthy has just been published. Open access is a thread. And then he kind of explains it. Okay. So he's a trainee working on his PhD. He published this paper. I happen to think the paper is brilliant. I read the paper. I thought it was extremely well done. And I'm actually very heartened to see a journal like Bioethics is publishing this paper, both because I think there's an immediate need to do it, but also I think that there is a historical need to do it, that this is a historical paper and will be read 100 years from now as countries and nations and states make unprecedented choices. And I think some of those choices are going to blow up in their face when they institute mandates, like in my state, California, that will exclude kids and not serve any real purpose because the kid already had Omicron anyway, so we can leave that aside. Okay, he's a PhD student trainee, and he wrote a brilliant paper, and I saw that some people didn't like what he had to say. Of course, to be expected. Some of the people who didn't like what he had to say said things back to him. Very rarely was it sort of a refutation of the main points or challenging the main points. It was mostly an ad hominem argument against him, against you, against anyone who touched it, against anyone who retweeted it or said it was good. It was just ad hominem, like a Gatling gun of ad hominem sprayed everywhere. Some of the same people who were critical of this guy and you all for writing this paper in very nasty ways have also published papers about online bullying of trainees in medicine. I was like, the person who's like documenting the problem of online bullying has become the bully. That's what I say. Okay, that to me is not principled because they actually have a veneer that they stand against online bullying. But if they really disagree with the person, well, then bullying is okay. And I think that's just a huge problem in our culture now, that if they're on the wrong team or they have the wrong idea, you can engage in the nastiest tactics that you yourself would find despicable. And 50 years ago, we would all agree that whether you agree or disagree, you can't treat people like that. Thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, so thanks for your kind words on the paper. Yes, that was Stephen's the lead author, and Rachel Gurari, my co-fellow at Hopkins, is a co-author. So that paper we wrote in early 2021. We submitted it to
February,
to the journal Bioethics.
They slow rolled you for months. No, I thought you submitted. I checked it. It was like 6 months between submission and print or something, or 8 months.
Yeah, longer. I think it's close to 9 months. Yeah. So we submitted it in mid 2021. I mean, imagine how controversial it would have been then if it's this controversial now.
Yeah.
Basically we just wanted to say some things that shouldn't be too controversial. For example, we shouldn't give vaccines to children until we have high quality evidence that benefits outweigh risks. And we don't have that for COVID-19. If you show me those data that benefits outweigh risks for certain groups of children or whatever, then we can talk, but we just don't have those data. We wanted to show that vaccinating children isn't playing a big role in protecting others for all kinds of reasons. And also that, in mid 2021, a lot of people were saying we need to vaccinate children in order to eliminate this virus or prevent it mutating or whatever. And we wanted to show that was not true.
Not possible.
Just a word about, so there's been a lot of attacks on my co-authors, especially Stephen. And I learned from my PhD supervisor that internet comments. They're the peanut gallery, and you have better things to do than fight with these people online. But the ad hominem attacks are just hopeless because Stephen Kriveld is a brilliant early career scholar who not only had the courage to write this paper, but in 2020 wrote a paper called Against the Lockdown Approach, when so many tenured academics who must have seen that authoritarian lockdowns maybe would turn out to be a bad thing, but weren't brave enough to say it. He's a PhD student. He wrote a paper about that. His whole PhD is on the moral reasons people might have to get vaccinated to protect others, at least for vaccines that block transmission. Rachel Gurari, again, brilliant early career scholar, has worked on vaccine mandates and healthcare worker hesitancy or whatever for years. And then a lot of the attacks on Stephen, because he's a philosophy PhD, said you're not trained in medicine, public health, or whatever. Like, well, okay, maybe those trolls should check some of the other authors because I'm a practicing doctor with a degree in epidemiology and a PhD in public health ethics. I mean, that credentialism just doesn't make sense. Just come at the argument. Anyone who wants to refute that paper, I invite them to submit a rebuttal into bioethics. I mean,
it was shocking to me. No, it wasn't shocking. I expected that it would be like that, but I think it's noteworthy because I think that some people are not principled. And actually, I think that's a principle that's cross-cutting across all these issues. Principled. What does it take to approve a new cancer drug? I want to see randomized control trial people live longer, live better. All of the ways we've eroded that standard has led companies make a lot of money. Doesn't always make people live better. What should it take to approve a vaccine in kids? You want to see reliable evidence they live longer, live better. That's what you're asking for. That's a robust randomized control trial, 100,000 kids in each arm. Why? Because they do so well naturally. Okay, so you need that kind of power. Principled. I wouldn't accept a retrospective observational case control study for some cancer drug. And I wouldn't accept that for a fourth dose in a 51-year-old healthy person. That's the principle. And I think a lot of people enter this dialogue and they're not principled because they don't, they just don't have anything before pre-COVID that they've, like these regulatory issues or public health issues that they've cared a lot about. And I also think that the principle, I think, is that, and I'm critical of a lot of papers, but I always try to criticize the problem with the paper. I mean, and I actually think it's more persuasive, but I saw very little of that in this. And I just don't think they can criticize that problem with the paper because I don't think there is a problem with the paper. It's a sound argument. In fact, it's surprised it's not a more common argument. I mean, if I were to try to justify why do they think we must pursue it with vigor, I think some people have literally in their brain a distorted risk of what the risk is to a healthy 2 through 18-year-old. And then they don't have a good, scale. On some of these maps, they have the scale on the bottom, and the scale should be like the risk of driving the kid in a car. And they don't have that in their brain. So, they're out of whack. Naturally, we close society, we close schools, so the risk to kids has to be huge, right? So then, we're kind of feeding them the sort of the environment where you could let your anxiety grow, because if the risk was as the risk is, as the risk actually is, then why the hell did you close the school? It doesn't make, so they're trying to process their own cognitive dissonance. I think people aren't good at thinking about what evidence is necessary to make sure medical claims are true. I don't think people know how often without randomized trials you can get burnt. And the personal attacks, I will say that, my thought about the personal attacks is they're never happy. He's a philosophy PhD. He's not a medical doctor. He's not an ID doctor, and I'm a doctor, but they say, well, you're not a public health person. Like, oh, I have an MPH from Hopkins. Oh, well, you're not an ID but you're not an ID public health. And then I recently had some faculty member screenshot my Google Scholar page and would clip my face out of it. And said, this is the kind of person talking about these kinds of issues. Somebody who has a very weak academic record. And I was like, what the hell? I was like, that's so harsh, man. I was like, I'm 39. I got 2 books. I got 300 papers. And I was like, come on, that's pretty good. Come on, don't do that to me. I'll take my knocks, but that's not a fair one. Okay, so I'll let you thoughts on this issue.
Yeah, so maybe the last thing first. So, I have a degree in epidemiology, but I didn't call myself an epidemiologist in 2020 when a lot of people, dusted off their epidemiology degree, which they had in non-communicable disease, and started calling themselves epidemiologists. No, I didn't do that because that's not my current work. My current work is in infectious disease ethics. but yeah, all kinds of people can have valid inputs, trained in different things, and we should be open to that. But yeah, I think there is a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. So yeah, one thing is that most people agree that standard childhood vaccines are really important. We need to make sure children get vaccinated with safe and effective vaccines for viruses and diseases that put them at risk. And I think some people think that if we express doubt about the COVID vaccine, well, that could reflect badly on the standard vaccines. But that's not the way I think. I think if you want people to trust public health advice, well, it needs to be truthful, and we need to be truthful that we just don't have the same level of evidence for COVID vaccines in children as compared to standard vaccines. And Alison Krug pointed out to me the other day that the rotavirus vaccine trial had 70,000 children in it, and they needed that in order to show that the benefits outweighed the harms because of rare harms and so on. And we just don't have that for COVID vaccines, and it's absurd to claim that we do. And then, yeah, I think you're right that there's a lot of people who, if they admit now that we don't need to vaccinate children, you say, especially children who've recovered from infection and so on, well, then we would have to admit that almost everything we've done to children for the last 2 years has been a net harm and a moral catastrophe. Yes. And I can see how that's hard to admit. But the answer to that isn't to force vaccinate children now.
You're absolutely right. That's they want to admit. And then that's why they, struggle with it so much. It's that we did this to them waiting for this moment. And I think that's also the motive behind this, under 4, they're like this negative study that failed. And then they give them, by the way, when normally you don't allow them to keep giving doses until the non-inferior endpoint is met. You get your 2 and then the whole trial is bunk. It's over. You throw the whole trial away. You don't say, oh, add a 3rd dose. Okay. I thought that was bad. That was one thing. But then they say, oh, guess what? It looks like it's significant. Let's just try to get this approval through. And then that didn't work. Fiasco. I don't think I think that the problem is that the White House, this is my bias. I think that the White House has taken control of this. They want to make act like they're the ones controlling this. They have the COVID czar. That's not the way America works. America has clear checks and balances, and regulatory agencies are civil servants who have their own standards, but they found a way to get those people to quit so they can control it. And then I think the problem with controlling it is they're just not good at it, and these are very difficult questions that they don't have the expertise for. Let's talk about censorship of misinformation. I think a lot about it. Ironically, I think that, I think there is a crisis of people seeking out terrible sources of information and believing all sorts of wacky things. And I see that all the time. And everyone wants to point the finger at Joe Rogan or somebody, you're the reason why they're doing this. I think the reason is mostly that you have bungled this so badly. Your messaging is so contradictory. I'm talking about public health authority, like the CDC. People know the studies you're giving them are so flawed. The data, they just admitted that they're not published wastewater data for many months. They admitted that they didn't even have the number of kids dead from COVID correct. They corrected it by 20%. I was like, you can't even count to a few hundred? I was like, we're not even talking about complex. And they said it's a coding error. Yes, we're talking about counting. You can't even tell me how many kids are dead of the one thing that's what we're talking about for 2 years. You don't even know how many kids are dead? You're off by 20%? I was like, this is rookie. This is so sloppy. And then you come hard with the vaccine mandate, you fire all these people, and then, oh, wow, everyone's having breakthroughs, and then you have to go look. Then you want to let people who are COVID positive work on the floor in the unit, but you don't want the person who's doesn't have COVID, but they had it in the past to work. It's crazy. Okay, so that's what erodes confidence. But in response, they want to double down on the policy and just try to censor misinformation. And as far as I can tell, some of the things that they call misinformation are misinformation, but others are deeply true. I was like, that's what I also think. Some are really true, and people just don't want to talk about. Thoughts?
Yeah, so that's right. Well, I think, we're doing a big social experiment on how do you manage misinformation. And we should be honest, there is a problem with misinformation in global society right now, of various kinds. And one way of handling it is to establish, promote, and develop trusted institutions that can provide high quality, true, justified by good quality science, information, and then you just say to people, this is what we think is the best reading of the current situation, and then just leave the kind of other kind of people promoting misinformation alone. And I think that's what Scandinavia has effectively done. In Scandinavia, the public health agencies have been very clear about communicating what they know, what the uncertainties around what they know are, what the reasons for things being done are, and they don't seem to worry too much about the rest. Then the other approach is trying to censor views you don't agree with. And it's quite clear that United States, for example, is taking that approach and trying to manipulate kind of tech companies to promote more censorship, which, as we've seen through multiple examples, has been a bit of a disaster. And one of the worries I have is that if you think you can just censor people you don't agree with, I think that kind of undermines the motivation you might have
to persuade them.
That's right, as a public health institution, to provide high quality health communication. And to make matters worse, a lot of the most dangerous misinformation in this pandemic has not come from Joe Rogan. It's come from the mouths of public health officials. Starting with, let's think about what misinformation has been. The science on masks has changed in early 2020. Well, that was misinformation. Masks are as effective as vaccines. That's misinformation. Vaccinated people cannot carry the virus. That 1 year ago, that was misinformation. COVID vaccines are just as effective in real life as they were efficacious in the trial. That was misinformation. We're having a pandemic of the unvaccinated at a time where post-vaccination infections were becoming dominant. That was misinformation.
Myocarditis doesn't exist. We've received no reports of myocarditis. CDC director. 3 months later, its incidence is 1 in 3K to 12K. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's been shocking. Censorship of the data of myocarditis, and you and I know that there's many cases going unreported.
Oh yeah.
And gosh, when we find that a mass intervention, especially one on young healthy people, is having some potentially bad side effects, even if the benefits on average outweigh those harms, there's a strong ethical reason to really carefully collect those data and try and work out, how should we best use this intervention.
And to disclose the harms for informed consent for the people getting the shot. Yeah. How about we must have booster mandates at universities? I'm trying to think of some other good. I mean, you hit so many of the good examples. To me, the original sin was the first example, which was between early March and then early April. We have all this new data that cloth masking works when there was nothing that came in those weeks. There was no the data didn't change. It was the same data. I mean, your value calculation changed, and your political calculation that you need to make people have something, give them something, that changed. And it was either that or hydroxychloroquine. So you choose. You got to give them something. They want something. You got to give them something. So you give them hydroxychloroquine or bleach or some light, or you give them the cloth mask. Well, you pick. At least that, they pick the cloth mask. Okay. But that was a real motivation. I don't think they can do a good job of censoring because I think, obviously, the problems are, one, the potential for abuse or misuse. These tech companies have too much power. Two, the tech companies, I think, are starting to feel the heat. People do recognize they have unprecedented power and they need to be crippled, broken up, brought to their knees. And then they offer this censoring to political parties in favor, sort of as a quid pro quo to keep, just don't mess with me. I'll censor whoever you want me to censor, let me make my billions. And I think people don't realize the potential for abuse. And the moment you have anyone who's in office whose goal is, I don't care about democracy, I'm not a principled person, I just want to stay here as long as possible. I mean, that's the first place I would lean on that company to get them to extinguish any narrative you don't want there. And they are effectively the public square. So you can do that, I think, quite effectively.
That's right. And you can also lean on public health agencies to collect data and communicate them clearly. You can lean on companies to produce high quality data showing that benefits outweigh harms before you sign them a check for multiple billions of dollars and so on. But some absurd things have been coming out of the White House just recently, where a journalist asked the White House press secretary, if this virus infected a 79-year-old president compared to a 20-year-old, wouldn't the risks be different? And the response was, we don't know that. I mean,
yeah, I saw that. Yeah, she doesn't. We don't know that. You don't know that?
we're 2 years into a pandemic where it's been clear for 2 years that actually the risks on average to 79-year-olds are much higher than the risks to 20-year-olds. And of course, you can find a 20-year-old who's very sick for other reasons who might actually face incredibly high risks. But the average 20-year-old is not facing kind of the same risks as the average 79-year-old. And again, that's a form of kind of misinformation. That's misrepresenting what we know about the risks of this virus.
I saw the mayor of New York City he's got everything gone. There's no vaccine passports. There's no mask mandates. It's a free-for-all, except those 2 to 4-year-olds. As you know, they're the ones causing all the problems. So they have to wear the masks. It's mandated. And then I saw a reporter actually ask them, I think from NBC News, what do you say to people who say this is bizarre? We're not doing what, every place on earth is doing, Europe or against the WHO, or, you're a renegade. What do you say? And the mayor says, well, I tell them that, New York City is not like any other city. I said, what the hell? Is that your answer? I was like, that would be like in the era of like human sacrifices. They're like, I got to tell him that when you come to this temple and we slaughter that person on the top of the temple, the Aztec Empire, we're like no other empire. We got to do it. We got to get the reins. So we got to slaughter that person on the top of the temple. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Oh my goodness. I mean, but people are saying, this is the mayor saying this. I thought he was a smart guy too. I'm disappointed.
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of problems with exceptionalism, where people think that they can do something in their place because there's something different about it than in other places. We've seen that in multiple countries. That's a big problem. And another big problem is the bias that doing something is doing better than nothing.
Yes.
Like you said earlier, in early 2020, people really want something, so we should give them something. But just like we know in medicine, sometimes doing something is worse than doing nothing. And it depends what that thing is, and we need to collect data to show which of them is true. And then the last thing is, the moral panic about children and the need of some societies to target children during this pandemic is something that has caused enormous, sometimes irreversible harm, and B, we need sociologists and anthropologists and so on to help us understand why this happened and to try and prevent it ever happening again. Because as I'm sure you and many of your listeners agree, it's been a barely mitigated disaster.
Absolutely. I want to talk about one thing that I think is interesting. We have an appointment of a new COVID czar in this country. Gentleman Ashish Jha. He's the dean of Brown University Public Health. And I don't want to make this about him because I got nothing really against him, although he was on the wrong side of a number of issues. Although, for one, the school closure, he did say he apologized, I think, to some degree. But he's been on the wrong side of other things. He floated some crazy idea that we should have a vaccine passport for domestic airline travel. And then, of course, that never happened. All because I think he was on a flight and he didn't like the way someone looked in the next seat. That's how I feel like the story came. But anyway, here's my point about him. We live in a world where there are always supposed to be checks and balances on decision makers in power. And the journalist is supposed to be one key check and balance on people in power. When Trump was in office, all the journalists hated him, so that was great. There was a great check and balance, skeptical of everything he said, held him to feet to the fire. Even at times when he was right, they were a little too skeptical, but at least there was some sort of pushback. Academics at universities also gave appropriate pushback when he, trumpeted hydroxychloroquine, et cetera. When Biden came into office, I think that many of them were more on the same team. Biden and the journalists and academics are on the same team. And this gentleman, Ashish Jha, who I think, is probably fine. He had a lot of long COVID threads and it got a lot of retweets and he got a lot of visibility on Twitter. And then he did a lot of media and, he's a calming voice. I don't think he actually says anything that interesting, but, it's just kind of the status quo narrative. And then he started to tweet like more and more in support of the administration. Like they had a new policy change and then like within an hour, his new op-ed supporting their policy change comes out in the New York Times. Like so early that he must have known the policy change was coming. How could he have written an op-ed and had it published in a minute? And then he admits that he's actually a recipient of these updates and announcements, which is not the same thing as talking points. He calls it updates and announcements from the White House. And he's been getting them, and that's how he's, supported their cause. But here's my point. If you have this world of social media and you have a phenomenon where people want to say good things that are praiseworthy of the politician so that they can get political jobs. And I think there are many, many people in this line. You have a really skewed view. You don't have independent public health experts giving their input. You have people auditioning for a job, but nobody knows that. The public doesn't know that. I think it's such a huge disservice. You look across Twitter, I saw this another person who I think it may be auditioning for a different job saying what a great decision it is to approve fourth dose in 51 and 50 and above. And how there are, quote, no harms. I was like, how do you know there are no harms? Like you ran a trial or something? I think we're having people audition for jobs and being treated as if they're an independent news source, independent voice. Thoughts?
Yeah. So, I mean, going back a bit, anytime someone is in executive power and trying to erode institutions and checks and balances in democracy, we should want to critique that. We should want to stop that. And it doesn't matter which side of politics they're on, if they're on your side or the side you don't like. I mean, we should be skeptical of efforts to try and do that. Edge out people who disagree with you at the FDA and so on.
Right.
And yeah, we also need more, and I've written about this, more transparency about who's making the decisions, on what basis are they being made, and what's the long-term plan. And in many cases, it's just been coming from these centralized source where, as you say, everyone's reading from the same playbook. And well, in a state of uncertainty in science, it just can't be the case that everyone agrees. And I want to see, a committee of people with a diverse range of views, appropriately qualified, and let them kind of make a decision and then review it. But that kind of check and balance, I guess, which can be done, has been thrown out the window in many places for kind of 2 years. People have been living in states of emergency for 2 years now.
I think that's so important. I wonder if you might want to talk about, I guess, one of the last two issues that we want to talk about, science in times of crisis. My belief is that crisis is when you need more evidence, not less. And actually, the uncertainty bounds in crisis are actually bigger than the uncertainty bounds of day-to-day medicine. And so, if anything, we should be running more randomized trials, not fewer, and waiting for data rather than just taking bold action. And I think people forgot, the point you make, the universal fallacy that often the best thing is to do nothing and rather than do something. And probably most of the things we did were actually detrimental. If you think about all the tens of thousands of things we did. But I wonder what your thoughts are, science in time of crisis. I think we learned a lot about how fragile we are.
Yeah, I think we absolutely learned a lot about that. And, my view, I think, is quite similar to yours, which is that if you have a crisis, people are going to propose all kinds of interventions, and some of them are going to look crazy to some people, and some of them don't have very good data to start with, and some of them look plausible or whatever. And we just need to run anything that looks even, with an even small probability of being helpful. We need to run high quality trials, randomized control trials on each one of those interventions as soon as possible. And that way we can pick and choose the ones that are actually working and not causing too much harm. But when people kind of want to censor different kind of areas of science or different things that might be run in trials or whatever, then we've got a big problem. The other big problem, of course, is money. When there's so much money to be made with interventions, then certain types of interventions are going to be run. Data are going to be interpreted in a certain way. Decision makers are going to be lobbied by people with money to institute those interventions, and other interventions are going to be kind of fall by the wayside. And the last thing I would say is just to reemphasize something I said earlier, which is that it's almost always ethical to run a trial of, a reasonable intervention. And just because you really believe that it's beneficial, it doesn't make it unethical to run that trial. The United Kingdom has just reported their first human challenge studies of COVID-19, where they infected volunteers with the virus. And look, that happens to be an area of my expertise, but if it's ethical to infect volunteers with the virus, then gosh, it's definitely ethical to run a randomized control trial of most interventions. So one of the things that tells you is that science depends on freedom, as we talked about before. There needs to be some intellectual freedom because we want to run as many of these as possible. And if you shut things down and you make science just a kind of a cult of people all saying the same thing, well, you're going to go down some dead ends, and science actually isn't going to progress as much as you might like it to.
What was the challenge trial for? A vaccine?
Well, they were originally proposed to be set up as a platform, partly to develop vaccines.
I see.
But it took so long to get them going for various reasons that by the time they were going, we already had some vaccines. But they managed to find some people who were unvaccinated and not previously infected, although they did run them on previously infected people. But it did give us really useful information. It showed that people could be infected with a very low dose of the virus. It showed that people were infectious by day 2, even though at day 2 they didn't have symptoms. Most people's symptoms peaked at day 5, but they're infectious by day 2. It showed that rapid antigen tests were really good at determining who was infectious and when. And just imagine if we had have had all those pieces of information
early on
in mid-2020, we might have been able to reduce the total duration of isolation for each infected person. And when there's millions of people or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people subjected to 14 days isolation, even if you can reduce that to just 10 days, that's a huge number of person days saved. So even though those trials haven't yet been used to test vaccines, I think we're going to learn a lot about the virus and immunity to the virus. And we're also going to learn a lot that's relevant to public health interventions.
Yeah, I have... That's a very interesting point. And I have no, unlike some, I have no prima facie objection to the idea of challenge trials. But I have one interesting thing that I thought about. I was arguing with somebody and they were saying, like, if you want to prove N95's work, community N95ing, you should do a challenge trial. Put an N95 or no N95 and then blow the virus in their face and see who gets it. And I was like, under that condition, I'm 100% sure it's going to work. But that's not the question. The question is, when you advise people to wear it with regular compliance and meet the virus as they would meet in the world without blow a big bunch in your face, does it work then? Is it a public health strategy? And so I think your point is well taken, that some types of questions, like you standardize when you're infecting them so you can look for when they're infectious, and perhaps it will give you something about like a theoretical efficacy of a vaccine, but it won't be the real world effectiveness. But it could still be helpful for some questions. But this mask question, this is not the way to do it.
Well, I would push back on that a bit.
Okay.
So for the vaccine question, one thing challenge trials would be really good for is preventing asymptomatic infection, because you can test people, you know whether they've been re-exposed, so you can check whether the vaccine prevents asymptomatic infection. But for the mask thing, look, I think you could run a challenge trial of that, but not in the way you described. So there's a famous study from a few decades ago called the all-night poker game. And it was a study of how common cold viruses are transmitted between people. And so they got people, it's basically a challenge trial where I think one person was infected, or at least this would be the best way of running it. You get people
who's known to be infected, and you make them play versus not play. Okay, I like that.
That's right. So you get people, but you would have to house them for many days together, and then you introduce an infected person, right?
Yeah.
And you just get them to do everyday activities, wearing an N95 mask or not. And I think then we would at least get some kind of readout on how effective they are. How efficacious they are. And you could do it with other types of masks too, And I think you probably could do some pretty useful challenge trials of different types of personal protective equipment. But you're right; it can't be just blowing it in their faces.
Okay, so then let me put the pin in what we agree and disagree. We agree that challenge trials are useful. The disagreement I had was not about the challenge portion; it was about the inoculum. And what you're saying is you can use a more realistic inoculum. And actually, I'll tell you what the best thing about your trial will be. You could simulate, like, what is it like when all the kids in daycare sit in the same room with no ventilation for 10 hours, cloth mask versus not. And what you will find is there are going to be outbreaks in both arms, because if you introduce them. So that, like, there's no way that flimsy mask does anything when you're all breathing the same air for 10 hours, right? So I think you're right. It will be useful, very useful. The only thought is that it won't get you the compliance issue, because the people in your study, like, if they're going to wear the N95, they're not going to slack. But maybe you'll simulate that too. Okay, well put. That's an interesting... All right, so I guess I was anchored too much to this person's idea of blowing it in their face, and I was like, that's such a stupid idea. Okay, I got anchored the wrong thing.
Just like any trial, it has to be as close to reality as possible.
Yeah? That's the key. It has to be as close to reality. Australia, your country... You are out of the restriction to talk about the restrictions in your country. I was talking to some people, and I thought it was crazy, but this woman was dating somebody. People email me something. So this woman was dating somebody, and they live in one state, and she had a job in another state. She's going to go take her job, but her partner decided not to be vaccinated, so he's not allowed to come. They had like a like you can't unvaccinated people can't cross state lines or whatever. Is that really a rule in your country?
Yeah, I think it might still be a rule in at least some places, and it certainly was a rule for a very long period of time. And yeah, Australia, it's been the best of times, but it's also I think it's been mainly the worst of times in Australia.
Yeah.
In 2020, Australia got lucky, right? We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world per capita.
Yes.
We're geographically isolated
Yes.
with a low population density. And when the virus hit Australia, it was the middle of summer, as opposed to when it hit the Northern Hemisphere, when it was the middle of winter. And so early on in Australia, for all those reasons, it was very easy for us to eliminate the virus. And then we fell into the trap of zero COVID. This idea that we could have Australian exceptionalism and eliminate the virus forever, no matter what the cost. And one of the problems is that we closed the border, and then each state had their own hotel quarantine system where they would let people in, but only if they stayed in, what was basically a prison system, but with a nicer kind of bed, where you had to stay in hotel quarantine for 14 days. And over 300,000 people were subject to this. But we also abandoned our citizens overseas. Some citizens couldn't return home. We prevented people from leaving the country and so on. But one of the kind of political problems became that because each state ran their own system, if there was a leak, if the virus was introduced in your state, then it could be blamed on the person in charge. And so there you see the link between zero COVID and authoritarianism, because these people were being blamed for failure to keep the virus out. And so then they had to, work very hard. They thought they had to work very hard to suppress the virus again. And what that resulted in was, the city I live in, Melbourne, becoming the most locked down city in a democratic nation anywhere in the world. We were locked down for 8.5 months. And this is hard lockdown, where you're only allowed to leave your house for a narrow range of reasons. You're only allowed to exercise outside for 1 hour a day. If the police catch you sitting in a park, you can be fined. You can't go more than 5 kilometers from your house. You have outdoor mask mandates. You can't have visitors to your house. Public assembly is banned. Kind of really heavy duty rules. And we were subject to those for many months, and other rules in between. And a lot of those rules, especially kind of everything focused on outdoors.
Yeah, I wondered that. Nothing.
Yeah, achieved probably nothing. We had playgrounds closed, just like you had in California. That only achieved harm. It didn't achieve benefit. And, I think in 2020, before we have vaccines, it's a difficult trade-off. We can have a discussion about what the right approach is. I'm personally not in favor of border closures. I think citizens have a right to leave and return to their own country. I also think, non-citizens, travelers, refugees or whatever should be allowed in. And, all of those things were kind of shut down. But you can have a discussion about, before we have vaccines, what's justifiable. But what happened is that, lockdowns, started out as tragedy, and they ended up as farce. By early 2021, we had widely available vaccines, but there were a couple of problems. One is that because the government had been telling people, you can prevent COVID in other ways, we can keep COVID out by closing our borders.
They had bred hesitancy.
That's right. People weren't motivated to get vaccinated.
Same with Hong Kong. That's why the Hong Kong people. Yeah, right.
Exactly. They're like, oh, we'll wait and see. Maybe some of these vaccines are too dangerous. I want to wait for a better vaccine. So there was a lot of waiting, because people faced no risk of COVID, or minimal risk of COVID, really. And the second reason is that there became this bizarre consensus that we had to vaccinate everyone, including young people, before we lifted the restrictions. And I think that was a huge mistake. Ethically speaking, what really matters once you get vaccines is that the people at high risk, which is mostly older adults and people with severe comorbidities, that those people get vaccinated. Once those people are vaccinated, which had largely happened by sort of early to mid 2021 in Australia, then from my point of view, there's no justification for further restrictions. And yet they went on, in a way that was very interesting, because in Australia, we have 2 large cities, Melbourne, population about 5 million, capital of Victoria, Sydney, population, I think closer to 8 million, capital of New South Wales. And at the same time, we had the same virus, the Delta variant, and Victoria, Melbourne, decided to do hard, fast lockdown. And Sydney decided to do a kind of softer approach, not as much later interventions and so on. And many pro-lockdown campaigners crowed at the time that this was a natural experiment, and we were going to show that hard and fast lockdown was the best way to go. And actually, when you look at what happened, there was very little difference between Melbourne and Sydney in terms of what happened. And moreover, by the time that Melbourne was put into hard lockdown in mid-2021, people were exhausted. People were demoralized. Mental health was in massive decline. People just can't live hyper-vigilant lives complying with these really stringent rules forever. And of course, and what do they call that? Compliance fatigue. People stopped following the rules, and of course they did. And that's why every pandemic plan ever written said that mass non-pharmaceutical interventions should be used only at the peak of an epidemic and for the shortest time possible, and then they should be relaxed because we have to acknowledge that these lockdowns caused enormous public health harm, and just the harm of, as I pointed out recently, 5 million people being subject to hard lockdown for 9 months. Well, that's an enormous loss of quality of life for a huge number of people.
Oh my goodness, that is, such an excellent point. But I think related to the kids, that if they had vaccinated the older people and removed the lockdown, it would have been a message that all you young people who locked down, you did it for them. It was an altruistic act, and you didn't do it for you because you still haven't been vaccinated. You gotta get out there, go to the bars. And that's politically tough. Just like closing the school, it's only justified if we did it for them to get this vaccine, which we got to approve one way or the other. By the way, they're poised to approve 25 micrograms of Moderna times 2, 50 micrograms in under 4, 50 micrograms. I was like, 50 micrograms? Oh my God, what are you thinking? Including a 4-year-old who just had Omicron. And by the way, I was reading one of these studies about vaccine-induced myocarditis, and they exclude people who had a COVID diagnosis within 30 days of getting vaccinated. Oh, yeah. I was like, I wonder what happened to their adverse events profile. We do have data from the VA. Here's the last thing I want to ask you about, money. I was looking around, and I saw somebody who is a big advocate for testing. Test early, test often, test asymptomatic, test. They're always tweeting test, and writing papers, test. The solution is more testing. And this person was a faculty member at a university. And then one day I go look at the profile, and this person's the chief scientific officer of a testing company. And I was like, I knew it was coming. Now they're the chief scientific officer of a testing company. There's another person who talks about schools can only open safely if you use our brand of testing. I'm pleased to announce that my modeling study is co-authored with the company that makes the test. Okay, great. And now Pfizer, they're going to make $100 billion this year. The U.S. has a new bill. $5 billion is I just write my tax check to Albert Bourla. I say, dear Albert Bourla, here's my taxes. Thank you very much for your products. No need to give me evidence. Just buy them all in advance. The evidence, obviously, how we do things. Money. Throughout this pandemic, I saw people were happy to throw the moniker that, that money was the root of all evil. I remember John Ioannidis, he didn't know about $5,000 that the former JetBlue CEO, apparently he wasn't even the current CEO, he was the former CEO of JetBlue, and he gave $5,000 to Stanford to a pooled fund that paid for research. John didn't know about it, but that's what led to all that stuff. Like, okay, obviously that's a conflict. That's what they said. They made a big deal out of it. But now we're talking about companies making hundreds of billions of dollars. A vaccine program that has to give you a yearly or bi-yearly shot to keep making that money. Like, they need that to be the case. And they had a meeting today where they're poised to approve these vaccines in perpetuity without clinical randomized controlled trial data, but with like immunobridging data or manufacturing data, like the flu vaccine, a very low regulatory bar. They need that market share of kids. We also have the testing bonanza. And then I think the worst profiteers of the pandemic, the same tech companies that are asked to regulate speech, profit from you being in your house. Look at how we're doing this on the Zoom. And all my services are bought through Amazon and Netflix, and I have to watch them because I'm trapped in my house. Like, they want me not to live life. That their whole goal is to live life through their lousy product that robs you of the experience. They're getting rich. So I wonder if you might talk about I don't know, your thoughts on conflict of interest in this pandemic and in a future crisis. I mean, how will we manage this problem of money? Money is driving a lot of these policies.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, financial interests are an enormous problem, even in the world of evidence-based medicine. The editors are getting paid, the authors of the studies are getting paid, and that distorts science in huge ways. Not to mention that companies don't want to publish negative data.
Right.
Companies want to publish flimsy trials with kind of secondary endpoints that show their product works as soon as possible, and they want to get it. They want to get it out there. And I think a lot of people don't realize how deep that corruption runs. And as you point out, it's not just about kind of vaccine or drug companies. It's also about testing companies. They're corrupting science and corrupting policy. Even mask companies. When you look at, as you know, one of the only trials that had been done of cloth mask versus surgical mask was sponsored by 3M, who manufacture the surgical masks, right? And so it's like, of course, the people doing that trial who are getting paid by the kind of surgical mask company, they're going to be influenced in some way. Now, it might still be the case that one type of mask is better than the other type of mask, but the point is that there's influence at play for a whole range of interventions. But yeah, one of the big lessons from the 2009 influenza pandemic was the Tamiflu debacle, right? So the manufacturer of this really weak antiviral hid evidence that it didn't really do very much.
Right.
Produced kind of flimsy evidence that it did something and then claimed that it did something else.
Right.
And then government spent billions of dollars stockpiling this medicine that did almost nothing. And so many times in this pandemic, COVID pandemic, I've thought, oh, it's a repeat of Tamiflu.
Wow.
And now we're really seeing that, right? Because governments are stockpiling, paying in advance for 4th and 5th doses that probably aren't doing very much for most people. Antivirals, everyone's so happy that we've got these antivirals. Hardly anyone talks about the fact that they were tested in unvaccinated
That's
people.
what I know. Where's the Paxlovid vaccinated study? They're not releasing the results. They just changed it on clinicaltrials.gov, pushing it into the future. Yeah.
That's right. And so whatever benefit it showed in unvaccinated people, well, we can divide that by, I don't know, 5 or 10 or more. And there's going to be a tiny benefit in vaccinated people. And yet,
and that's best case scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Best case scenario. It might be worse. Many of these interventions might be a net harm. At some point, an additional vaccine dose is a net harm. Depends on who you are, depends on the vaccine and so on. At some point, an antiviral is going to be a net harm for you. Just like many times when people take antibiotics, they don't really need antibiotics. So by definition, it's a net harm intervention. And we hardly ever talk about that. But a big reason why it happens is money. And I don't necessarily think there's a conspiracy going on. It's just business.
Yes,
the companies have got to make money. And one of the ways they make money, I mean, yeah, the manufacturers of remdesivir spent millions of dollars lobbying the White House directly. And I don't know what Pfizer has spent on lobbying and advertising and so on, but it must be huge. So yeah, money plays a major role. But also, as you mentioned, there's the bigger issue of wealth transfer, that if you shut down society, what happens is rich people who own shares and property and so on get wealthier. Poorer people lose their jobs and get poorer, suffer more domestic violence and so on. Internet companies suddenly make an enormous amount of profit. But is that good for society? I mean, that's a much bigger political question.
I think that you're absolutely right, and that the lockdowns, I mean, this is a point that Jay Bhattacharya has made, and I think he's correct, that it has perpetuated the wealth inequality. It's made it worse. And when you perpetuate a wealth inequality, that's already a problem, make it worse, and then take away education, but from poorer, disadvantaged kids, create a vaccine mandate in schools that will, again, hit disadvantaged minority kids, give all this money to pharmaceutical companies for the next umpteenth vaccine. What do you think the net effect of all this will be on, and give massive corporations the power to like silence and dissent and quelch speech, etc. What is going to be the net effect of all these things on the democracy itself and political volatility? I mean, I think it's going to be potentially cataclysmic, and that's my real worry about all these things. Anything that we didn't talk about that you want to hit? I think we talked about observational studies, 4th dose, the paper on kids' vaccines, cloth masking, New York City, authoritarian public health, which I think is a fiasco. Are they shooting the deer in China? They must. I think they are killing animals. They probably are killing, at least it's killing somebody, I think. I don't know. Censoring misinformation, science in times of crisis, Australia. Um, oh, the last thing I want to talk about. Accountability, vengeance, credit. Okay. I think I keep hearing calls for accountability, and I think we have to be really careful. We need accountability. We don't need vengeance, and we can't have vengeance. Even for people who did horrible things and screwed things up. Accountability. Here's what accountability means to me. People who are in positions of power or real positions of influence. By that I mean, if you directed a federal agency that was supposed to running randomized controlled trials and you didn't fund any randomized trials of NPIs, I think you got to be fired. Sorry, NIAID director's got to be fired, NIH director's got to be fired. If you worked at FDA and you led to the resignation of the two principled people who put up a bulwark against boosters, I think that you should be fired because you pushed them out. People in the administration should be pushed out of the administration and no longer voted in if they did these things. People who are architects of lockdown, who distorted information publicly, I think should be pulled from those positions. That's one. People who worked in the news media, who covered it wrongly, as bad as, weapons of mass destruction. I think that they should be demoted from the public health perch to maybe they can cover the traffic beat or something like that. They need to be pushed out of their position. The New York Times reporter who cried wolf about schools, I think should be demoted to other places. People who were leaders of universities that didn't do a good job of upholding academic freedom, et cetera, they need to be pushed out too. The average person on Twitter, even the people I dislike a lot because they say really dumb things, I remember to put the toilet seat down when I flush. When the people say stupid things, I don't necessarily think they need to lose a position that doesn't even exist, which is the right to just say whatever you want. So I'm more willing to give them some grace. I think some people who I did used to respect, they went crazy about zero COVID. I disagree with them, but again, it was on. They're allowed to talk, so I don't have anything. I think we have to be careful not to seek vengeance. And then the last thing I'd say is credit where credit is due. There were a lot of people who I think were unfairly treated, who were really courageous and right. And they signed things when it brought them great difficulty. They published papers in New England Journal about schools and kids when it came at great professional cost. There were people who were right on school closures, right about myocarditis, right about boosters, right about vaccine mandates, right about not having vaccine mandates, right on these issues. Those people should be elevated. We should give them some credit where credit is due. We should have listened to them, and we should give them some praise in the years to come. But I wonder, what are your thoughts on how do we, when we heal, how do we balance accountability, credit? I worry that some people want real vengeance. I said, easy, Tiger, vengeance. And then the last thing I say is letting people forget. Most people, you have to let them forget that they were wrong because they didn't say much. And their brains will rewrite what they believed. Let them forget. It's okay. People always forget when they were wrong. They don't, just let them. That's the way they cope. Let the people forget. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that I don't want to see vengeance or personal attacks on people who were wrong. I also don't want to see people being forced to recant their beliefs, because that's effectively what we saw among scientists who say, "Oh no, I know I used to say this, but now the science has changed and I believe it."
Yeah.
I think that's a really bad look, and I don't want to see people being forced to do that either. I tend to agree that there should be some kind of consequence, and one kind of consequence is that the people who were right. And the people who had the courage to stand up for what was right, should be elevated and promoted. And part of the reason for that, is just because we need those people in future who'll be able to, see through the noise, evaluate things appropriately, both scientifically and ethically, and come out with recommendations. And if we could get more of those people in charge, then hopefully things might be better next time. But there's a real problem, and there's a problem of how do we handle that as a society. And I agree. I think we just have, like I think I've said previously, we have to welcome people back to a discussion, but acknowledge that the terms of the discussion have changed, because we now have very clear evidence that some of the things that people said just weren't true, weren't helpful, were on balance harmful, and that major values of our society have been put at risk. But we can pick up the pieces together, I hope.
Zeb Jamrozik, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure as always. I hope people enjoyed this discussion.
Thanks, Vinay. Likewise.